Hello everyone, welcome back to another video of Keen. In this video, we'll be discussing on Keen's Gulp Build Tools and how you can customize it. So first thing we need to do is to purchase and download Keen, and once you've downloaded and unzipped it, it should look something like this. And what we need to do is to go ahead and open this folder within our IDE of choice. What we're using here is Visual Studio Code. As you can see right here, we need to open up the theme folder and go to tools, and in there we will see the gulp config.json file. Now in here we have a few fields that we need to take note. The first thing we need to take note is this config field, and what this does is for us to define whether it's a debug mode or you want to turn on and off debug mode. And what debug mode means is when you run the gulp command within your command prompt or your terminal, it just gives you more notes and more messages as it runs. And then compile is just to say how do you want to compile your assets. So when you have RTL enabled, at the moment is set to false by default, but you can always turn it on like so. Once you have RTL enabled, you will basically compile and build a right to left version of Keen. What right to left means is for languages such as Arabic, where you need to read the text from right to left, so it kind of flips the entire page so that your language can be displayed correctly. Next thing we see here is the skip. And in skip, what we're just defining here is all the plugins that we will skip within the RTL version. The reason why we're skipping all this plugins is because there's no reason to have an RTL version of, for example, like an icon. An icon, whether it's right to left or left to right, it will still be displayed as a single icon. So these are plugins that we're skipping for the RTL version. You can ignore this and just leave it as it is if you want, or if you include your own plugin, then you can, and your plugin does not need an RTL version, then you can also include that here. Next comes this for fields, which is it's pretty self-explanatory, like JS Uglify, CSS Minify, and source maps for both CSS and JS. You can just turn it on and off right here. Next comes the path field, and what this does is it just defines where the source is coming from. For example, if you go into the demo 1 right here, so this is the source folder. So what we're defining here is if we are running a gulp command for demo 1, it will just grab all these files from this source folder. If it's demo 2, then it will grab it from this source folder. So it's just to define where the source is coming from. Node modules, similarly with source, it's just to define where the node modules is coming from. In this case, is this folder right here. If your node modules is sitting in another position, like another path, then you need to update this field to wherever your node modules is located. Next comes this demo API URL. This is, you don't need to worry about this, simply because this is for our demos. For example, some of our demos require some API callback, such as our data tables or some models or some other validation type plugin. When we require an API callback, then we will use this URL. However, you don't need to worry about this, simply because if you guys are using your own API callback, it'll be injected within the JS itself rather than within this within the config, the gulp config. Lastly, in the main build or the main config field is the dist field. The dist field is important is because it defines where your assets is going to be built or deployed to. In this case, when you run a gulp demo 1 command, it will deploy the assets to the demo folder, dist and assets, which is basically within this folder here, which is empty at this point of time. So let's try to just run the gulp command to see the assets get built. So we go to our tools folder, open up a command prompt by typing in cmd in the address bar and then running gulp and then demo1 and let it run. Alright, it's done. As you can see, our assets got populated based on whatever source that we have within this folder here. So we have our JS, our media, plugins, and Sass gets converted or compiled to CSS. So basically this is how all this the config works. Now if you have your project outside of this path, you can just define it to your project's path. So in this case, for example, let's just put a new folder here called project. Say this is your project, and then within your project folder you have an assets folder like so. And what we're going to do is we just need to change this to project and then assets. So what's going to happen here is all of our source code that we have in here in demo1, for example, will be then compiled and built and then deployed into our project assets folder. As when we do the same thing here, you see this file get populated like so. Alright, it's done, and then you can see all of our CSS is all built here. So this is a very powerful tool on where you want to set and define your assets, your project assets folder. Alright, so that's the config. Next thing we're going to talk about is the build. Now in our build we have 5 main fields, which is the main, vendors, pages, theme, and media. So right off the bat, this field here called theme, this only exists within demo1. Demo 2 does not have a theme simply because demo 2 does not require a light or dark theme. So what a theme actually is just skinning on top of the current demo. So if we look into demo 1 and we go to, let's minimize this, and we go to our Sass and we go to themes, as you can see we have light and dark themes or skins for demo 1. But if you go to demo 2, we go to Sass, there is no theme here. So this is only applicable to demo 1. So the moment that a demo doesn't have a theme, this field gets ignored. So don't have to worry about that. So let's look into our main field. Our main field consists of 2 main okay, let me rephrase that. So all fields within the build will consist of 2 main field types, which is the source and then the bundle. Source is basically to define where your CSS or Sass is coming from, and scripts is to define where all your JS or JavaScript files are coming from. And then once you define all this, you just then need to bundle it up, bundle the styles and the scripts into individual files, either as a style.bundle or scripts.bundle. So this is the format of how we are doing our bundling. So in this case, what we're doing here is we're just defining that all of our styles are within this style.sass file, which is this file right here. And we're going to bundle this style into this Sass file into this CSS file. So if you look into our assets, CSS, and you see this file here, it's basically the result of bundling our Sass. So in scripts, similarly with our styling, we are just defining all of the components, all the JS files within the components folder, which is this one here, all of these files here, as well as all of the JS files from layout, which is this one here, bundling all of them up into a single file called scripts.bundle, which is right here, and that's pretty much it. So if you want to add your own JS file globally, all you need to do is just add your own custom JS file within the components or layouts. It depends on what kind of script you would like to include in your project. Right, moving on to our vendors. Vendors is our is a field for us to define every single plugin that Keen uses. So we have two types of plugins within Keen. We have a base, which is this, and then we have custom. And within the base plugins, we have, it splits up to two different plugin types. We have a mandatory plugin types and optional plugins. Mandatory are plugins that Keen uses all the time and is required for Keen to be functional. If you remove one of this, like for example, if you remove jQuery, most likely Keen will stop working. So we highly recommend for you guys to not remove anything from the mandatory plugin list. However, our optional plugin list is where you can remove any plugin that your project does not require. For example, if your project does not require a Bootstrap time picker, all you need to do is just delete that, save the Gulp file, and then run your Gulp command, and you're good to go. Now, if you want to add your own plugin globally, all you need to do is just scroll all the way down to the bottom of this custom plugin list and then enter your own plugin. And then what you do is follow the same format. If your plugin has CSS, you add styles into it. If your plugin has fonts, you add fonts into it. If your plugin has scripts like this, add scripts to it. And that's pretty much it. And what happens after that is it gets all of this, all mandatory and optional plugins, all of these plugins listed within these two fields gets bundled up into a single, either a JS bundle or a CSS bundle. So, and then what you do is you can include this bundle file globally within your project. So when you add any additional plugins into this base field, what you're doing is you're adding plugins globally within your project. So if your plugin is being used for every single page or very often, you add it in this list here. Now, if your plugin is only going to be used once or twice within your entire project, we highly suggest for you guys to add it into the custom field. So if you open this up, let's minimize the base. As you can see, we have plugins split into individual fields, and each individual field we have the same format of the source and bundle. So what this does is we're going to grab all the scripts or JS files or even CSS files from that single plugin and bundle it up into its own individual bundle. And what we do after that is we then include this single bundle for that specific page that requires it. So for example, like if you look at full calendar, we have styles and we have scripts, and then it gets bundled up into its own CSS and its own JS. So similarly, if you require this CSS or this plugin, you edit it, you just leave it as it is. But if you don't, you can just delete it like so. If you want to add your own custom script or plugin, scroll all the way down and just follow the format, add a comment to it, and then put in, say, my plugin like so. And then start putting your source. Oops. And then in your source, after your source, you need your bundle. And then what you do is you just follow the format that we have here. Define the styles, define the scripts, and then set where you want to bundle it. And how you read the bundle pathing is it's going to deploy this bundle file into this path, basically your destination path, which is what we defined up here, if you recall, right here. And then following from this path, it would then add on the remaining path name. So in this case, it's going to our demo this assets, and then going to plugins, custom, cropper, and then the bundle file name. So let's have a look. This is a CSS, so it's going to our this assets, go to CSS, go to plugins. Oops, not CSS, just going to plugins, and then go to, where's this, custom, and then cropper, and you see the two files right here, which is these two files. So that's how you add your own plugins to your project using Keen's Build Tool or Gulp's Build Tool. Next comes our pages. So let's minimize this, minimize vendors, and open pages. So pages is a special case. What pages, how Keen define pages is like, for example, if you look into our examples, like let's look into our HTML here. So pages are like all these pages here. So like you have a login page, a wizard page, pricing table, invoices, and error pages. So what this means is, for example, a page is like a single individual page. It doesn't have any like layout, following layout, or it has its own assets, its own styles, and its own individual components. So what it does is it will grab all of the source file from the pages source, which is located here. So it's going to grab all this, all the folders in all the source files, which is all of this, and also all the JS files within this pages, which is this one here. And then we're going to bundle it up into its own JS and its own CSS. So if we look into our compiled assets, where it's going to our dist CSS pages. So this CSS pages, as you can see, our CSS is here, our JS is right next to it, which is here. So if you're creating your own page, all you need to do is just add your own page. First, you need to create HTML for it. So you add your own HTML within your project. And then what you do is when you add your source files, you just create like a new folder. Like so, say this is my page, you can call it, and then put your source files within it. Similarly with your JS, you do the same thing. You create your own folder, say my page, and then you put your JS files in it. And then when it compiles, it goes and it deploys into one of this. And then what you do is on that HTML, on that page on your project, you then include those CSS and JS files. So for example, if you look into our login page, if you look into our source, as you can see, where is our page? See this? This is our page CSS right here. And then if you scroll all the way down, we see our page JS right here. So you just have to include it into that single page and you're good to go. So let me just delete these folders so we don't confuse ourselves. Where's this? Yeah, we don't need this as well. Okay, so that's pages and themes. As I mentioned, that only demo 1 has this, and it just compiles the light and dark skins for demo 1. Now, if your project has skins, then of course you can use this build tool as well, or rather this field. And what it does is just grabs all of the source files from the theme folder, which is here, and grabs all this and puts it into the CSS themes. So if you look into our assets, just close paint themes, and then we see all the stuff here. So if you open side, you see light and dark CSS, light and dark, light and dark, oops, here, light and dark. And then if you look into our source files, we see similar structures, like so. And lastly is our media field. What it does is fairly simple. It grabs all of our media files, whether it's images or SVGs, and we're just going to deploy it into our dist assets folder. So if we have a look into our source folder, we have a media folder here, which has all of our like background JPEGs, logos, even SVGs, stock images, and so on. And what we're going to do here is we're going to copy all this and then deploy it into our assets here. And that's pretty much it. If you want to remove media files, like for example, if your project does not require maybe client logos, for example, you say your project doesn't require any of these files, all you need to do is just delete this folder. And then when you run the gulp command, it will just won't copy that or deploy that since it doesn't exist in the source folder. Alright, so that is basically how you read the gulp config file. The next thing we're going to discuss is how the additional command line options that you can write when you're running gulp. So if you look at our official documentation here, so the build config is what we just discussed, and then from here you can actually read up on what each field represents. So in case you missed out like what I just said, you can just read up here. It's totally fine. And now comes the build tasks. Now we've gone through the yarn task and the gulp demo 1 or the gulp and then the demo flag commands. So the demo flag is just to indicate which demo we want to build. But besides this simple command, we can add different things. So what this does here is, remember how I mentioned that RTL is set to false by default? We can change this to true, and then we can save our gulp config, and when we run gulp demo 1, it basically does the same thing. However, since it's set by default and maybe you don't want to always compile or build a RTL version all the time, then all you need to do is just add RTL equals true at any given time that you want RTL to be built. So similarly with all the other commands here, if you put a just --JS flag, what you're doing here is you're just going to compile JS files. So let's do a demo, and let's go to demo 1 and go to assets and delete everything. Alright, our assets is now blank, and then what we're going to do is we're going to run a gulp and then JS and demo 1 as per this command line right here. And what's going to do is only going to build and deploy JS files. So let's run that, put this aside, and let's look into our folder and watch it get built. Okay, it's done. As you can see, only the JS assets are being built and deployed. So if you open here, all of the JS only gets built. Now this is especially useful if your project is rather large and you only did JS changes or JS modification to the code, and you only want to deploy and build the JS files, then you just run with the JS flag. Similarly with Sus, if you just need you only did Sus changes, then you just deploy the Sus. Again, if you have only media changes, that means let's say you remove certain media files from the source, or you added new media files into the source, then you just do this and you will just only deploy the media folder. Now comes to this flag called prod. What prod means is a production build, and what it does is just minifies all GSS and CSS. So let's go ahead and first rebuild all of our assets, all CSS, media files, and JS files. Alright, our assets are built. So if we look into our code, let's choose our style bundle. As you can see, it's still very neatly written and readable. So let's say if you want to, I'm done with my project and we've done testing, and if it got its approval and everything like that, and we are ready to deploy it for our production. And what we do is we type in gulp prod, and then we select our demo. Where's our up here, and then demo 1, and then we run that. Alright, it is our prod build is done, and as you can see, our CSS is now minified. And the reason why we do this is the moment when you minify items or files, it basically becomes a lot smaller. So at the moment, our CSS bundle is actually 1.7 megabytes, whilst this might look rather large simply because Keen as an entire project or entire website, it consists of many different components, many different pages to showcase or to demonstrate all the widgets, all the components that Keen has. Therefore, it's quite large. However, within a real world project, you may be removing certain things and you will not grow that large. So let's go ahead and run our regular gulp to see the difference. So now we have 1.7 kilobytes. And as you can see, whilst it's still compiling, you can actually see that the file size increased by probably 300 kilobytes. So that's the benefit of having a production build. So next thing we have is watch task. What this does is when you turn this on, any changes you do within the source folder, like any changes that you make, it will automatically build and deploy the assets to the disk folder. So similar with this, what this is doing is you're just watching any JS changes, and for this case, you're watching for any SAS changes. So if you plan to, if you don't really want to keep writing the gulp command all the time, you can just type in gulp watch and then the demo that you're working on, and then what it does is it will just automatically compile and build and deploy all assets every time you make a change. But finally comes our localhost commands. To start a localhost environment, all you need to do is just type this command, which is gulp localhost, and then the flag. The flag basically says which demo you would like to build or showcase in your localhost. And what it does, it will automatically use the port 8080, or rather 8080. Now, if you want to change this port to something else, for example, let's say this port is being used for another project, for another environment, you can change it within the gulp watch file, which is, if you scroll down to our tools, gulp, in the gulp folder, we have a watch here, and then we have a connect basically here. So all you need to do is you need to add your new port. So just type in port and then the number that you want, like 8081, and that's it. Save this file and then you're good to go. Well, of course, once you save this file, you need to run the gulp localhost command again to refresh the localhost environment. Alright, that's it for this video. I hope you find this video informative. If you did, give us a like. Also, please subscribe to the YouTube channel so that next time we release a video, you get an update. Please follow us on our social medias. Links will be in the description below, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Take care.